What exactly is Excel table as we speak about? Now, often we are used to, packing our data on Excel as per the image that we're having on the left side. And that is just basic information as assembled depending on what works for you. But what an Excel table looks like is whatever we're having on the right side. And what we're going to do is just how basically to be able to work with your Excel tables to be able to assist whatever work it is that you're doing or on your Excel. Essentially, Excel tables assist us to make our work easy, our interaction with data easier, and especially if you're a heavy data user, and to the extent that you might need to start building databases, then Excel tables comes in very handy. And we're going to, for this session today, to just give a quick illustration of how exactly the table works. But before we get there, why don't we ask ourselves, what are some of the advantages, or why essentially is it necessary to even put your data in Excel tables? So these are some of the benefits of having your data in an Excel table. When you put your data in an Excel table, number one, you get down the dropout lists, or some would want to call that the filter buttons. As per the image we have back here, you'll see that on all the headers, we're having the buttons that help us to filter down our data, which when you click, as we had mentioned in the previous session, helps you to be able to narrow down and quickly take a look around your data. The other advantage is the table range is able to expand or shrink automatically depending on how you interact with your data. So if you're going to add in more information to your Excel tables, then it's going to expand. And if you will reduce part of it, then the table will also shrink to be able to accommodate the new data set as it is. And the other benefits will be able to look at them practically. And among other things is your formulas also autofill when you're working with Excel tables. So what I'm going to do is to open the Excel file that we're working with. Now, in the data given here, of course, on page 1, we have just some basic information for you and the necessary links to take you to the website, to our social media, so you can follow, like, and the rest. But I'm going to go to the first sheet, which has our data. What I have here is just a quick, some part of data set that has been put in here, but I want us to see how we are able to transfer it into a table and make use of it easier. So the first thing is you need to prepare your data before you get it into an Excel table. And what essentially do we mean by preparing your data? What you need to do for starters as you work on this data before you take it into the table, you want to first make sure that you don't have any blank columns. You want to see to it that you don't have any blank rows, that you don't have any unnecessary cells that have been left blank. The reason for this is the point where we'll now be converting our data from this, which is an array of cells, into an Excel table. It will only pick the part of the data that is complete, such that if there are any breaks in your data, then the table might omit some part of it. And this becomes risky when you're working with big data sets, because you might not necessarily see the extent to which the table has been created. And that might mean part of your data has been left out, which then means that your reporting will not be correct as it is. So one thing you want to first make sure is that your data is complete with no blank columns and rows. And if you remember the previous sessions we'd done data management, and we'd illustrated how to quickly run through your data to just check if you're having any blank rows or columns. For this data that we're having here, I intentionally inserted some blank column or row somewhere. We're having 2021, and that is the row that has been left blank. Essentially, what I would have done in my data in trying to figure out the blank column or row, I would put my cursor at the very start of the data. Then I would want to press Control and the down key button to just see where my cursor will stop at. And you notice that when you do that, your cursor stops at some cell. The reason why your cursor stops there is just not for liking, but because it has noted a blank row in whichever area that is. And if we had tried doing Control and the right arrow key, you realize that the cursor goes to the farthest end of our data from what is visible, which means we are not having any blank columns. So then how do we deal with the stop there, we will need to critically look at that area to be able to figure out. And if you're keen enough, you will notice that the row headers, we are skipping number 20, which means either it's been hidden or it's been shrunk. In this case, I intentionally reduced the size of row 20 so that it wasn't so obvious. So what you need to do is to just select it. We don't have any data in it, as you can see. So then deleting this row, I believe you can right click, select delete, or you can use the shortcut we learned the other time, Control minus. With that row done, when we go back and repeat the same process, put our cursor at the start of the data, press Control and the down key button, you notice our cursor goes to the tail end of the data from what, again, we are able to see, which then means we have dealt away with the blank row that was there. The next thing you want to do is to now transfer this information into a table so that we can try see some of the benefits we were indicating back there. And the easiest way really to convert this data into a table is to put your cursor anywhere inside the data. And I'm just going to step back a little bit to just pick something that I may have missed indicating. So I'll just press Control Z so that I can undo. And if you want to insert your Excel table on this data set, you want to put your cursor anywhere inside the data. Then you will want to go to the Insert tab. Up in the ribbons, we have Home as the first tab, then the Insert is the second tab. So go to the Insert tab. Then in the very first grouping of data, you'll see Table as a third component, Table. So you'll click on Table. I want you to notice something here, that Excel was able to do some selection, but in that selection done, it skipped some part of the data. Notice that the part of the data that has been skipped is being separated by that row we were trying to delete in the previous step. So this is what happens when you try to create a table without ensuring that your data is completely flowing. So I want to escape this process, or rather cancel. Then I'll remove row 20 as we had done, then repeat the same process. So put your cursor anywhere inside our data. Then I'll go to the Insert tab. Then I'll click on Table. When I click on Table, notice the new selection that Excel has made. It has actually been able to pick in everything that is part of my data. Now, in this pop-up here, in the cell here, Excel is giving us the cell references that are being captured, or rather that will be converted into a table. Then the important thing is there's a checkbox that indicates that your table has headers. This is very important because when it is ticked, as it is currently, it means that the first row of this information is going to be treated as the headers, to mean that whatever information is about products and the information below this column D is about category. If this is not ticked, what will happen is Excel will insert a temporary header, then rename them, column 1, column 2, column 3, all the way to the end. So if this is not ticked, Excel will insert temporary headers, which then you will be given, you'll have the responsibility to now edit them into whatever components you want to name them. So it's very important that if this row, the first row here, date, product, category, if these were my column headers, row headers rather, then I want to come here and say, this is my header. So I'm going to make sure I tick that. Then you click on OK. Now, this is a practical session. I want to assume that you are doing as we do. So having said OK, this is what transpires. I want to quickly illustrate some things that happen with this information here. The first thing is, of course, this data has been given the new coloring scheme that we're seeing there, as opposed to the data in the next sheet, which is more or less the same information, but for different periods. You see that the one we'll be able to convert into headers has been given some coloring. But that is not the only thing that happens with Excel tables. The other thing we're having is we have these filter buttons automatically put in here. And the filter buttons are supposed to help us sort and filter our information depending on what we want. As opposed to the normal data, and when I refer to normal data from this point on, we'll be referring on whatever is in the additional data sheet. As opposed to the additional data sheet, if I wanted to filter this data, I can, but I have to follow some steps. I have to probably select the information, go to the data tab, then find the filter button. If I want to sort, I have to select the column I want to sort, then go to the home tab, then find filter wherever it's found. But for the data that we put in the table, if I wanted to filter or sort, I'll just come and click on the drop-down button here. Sort options are already up here, and I can even sort by color. Filter options are automatically here. I'll just need to click whatever I want to filter in or out, depending on what I'm trying to achieve. And that becomes our information. That is the first thing. So we have the filter buttons for the table having been inserted here. The other thing we indicated about the table is it allows us to, the table is able to expand or shrink depending on whether information is being added or not. So for instance, if I came to this cell adjacent to my table and put in a new column, say profit. If I press enter, you're going to notice that the coloring that we're having here for the table is going to automatically extend to accommodate my column. So here we go, me pressing profit, and you see that happens. And in the event that I now come and I remove my profit, my column, you notice that when I remove, because it was the title, Excel leaves it at column as column 1. But if I decided to delete this column, I could just come and do a control minus or a right click delete, and we don't have the table extending to that area as well. And that is good. So that is the second thing that we are able to achieve with our data being on a table, in that when you add data adjacent to the end of the table, it automatically adjusts to the right. That also happens below. If I came here and added a new region, let's call it Northeast. If I press enter, the coloring is going to automatically adjust to accommodate the new region that I just put in there, or the new data set, depending on whatever it is you put, is going to be automatically adjust to accommodate it. Now, before we proceed, actually, before we leave the advantages of that, the other advantage we get with having our data inside a table is that when you scroll down on your data, you do not lose some elements. You do not lose some elements of your table. So if you're scrolling down on your laptop, you're going to realize that the headers are going to stick. You will still be able to see the headers even as you scroll down on your information. But maybe that we'll be able to see that more clearly when we start working with a larger data set, which we will towards the end of this. Now, let's speak a little bit about the table we have created. As opposed to the data we have on the additional sheet, the table here has, among other things, been able to compress the information we have here so that they're considered as one in the event we were doing data modeling. To that regard, we need to rename this table to use it in the event we wanted to further use it in other models in Excel. So how do we change the name of this table? Having successfully created this table, there's a new tab item that was added on our Excel, which is only visible when your cursor is inside the table. So currently my cursor is outside of the table. When I click inside anywhere in my table, you will see there is a table. In your version, I believe you have table tools that you'll see somewhere in your ribbon. When you click away from the table, you notice that it disappears. When I click anywhere inside the table, I have this temporary tab item called table or table tools that is there. So what then you want to do is, with your cursor inside the table, you'll click the table, or we've said table tools. Then on your far left, we have the pane to be able to rename the table. So just under one table name, I want us to give this table some name. I want us to call this table sales data. Now, when you are renaming your table, there are some principles that you need to follow. And those have been listed in the slide that I'll share later on. But just to quickly highlight on some of those, you cannot just come and name this table C. Because as you all know on Excel, if your cursor was on any cell, then you typed C, Excel will tell you the column in which that cell is in. And if you typed R, it will tell you the row. So you cannot type C or R as the table name. The other thing is your table name should not have spaces. So if, for instance, I wanted to call this data sales data, I cannot write the word sales, space, and data. I'll need to figure a way of combining them. So what I can do, for instance, is I can do sales underscore data. The other thing is I cannot use the arithmetic operators in naming the table. So I cannot say, for instance, sales minus data or sales times data. Then lastly, the other principle is you shouldn't use a name that's already in use. So if we are going to have, let's say, 4 tables by the end of this presentation, I cannot have any 2 tables with the same name. So those are the principles, but you will be able to review them when we share the materials later on. So what I want us to do is, we say you click anywhere inside the table, you go to the table tools up in the ribbon, then far left, you will see the area that is written table name. Just below table name, there is a place where you need to put in your new name. So I want us to call this sales data. So like I've said, because those are 2 names, I will type in sales data as one word like that, or I could type in sales underscore without using a space data. Notice that this is not a minus. So it is not sales minus data. It is sales underscore data. Then when that is the name you want to use for your table, you press enter. That is your confirmation that you want this table to be called sales data. Before we renamed it, Excel had given it a name. So table 1, table 2, depending on how many tables you are having on all the open Excel files currently on your laptop. We'll proceed from there. Now, having achieved that, so we've renamed our table. I want us to now try and bring in more data into our table. So I'm assuming that, this was data for, say, Q1 or area. Then we now want to bring in more information at the end of month 2. We want to bring in the information. And for now, I want us to assume that the new information we want to bring in is whatever we are having in the additional data sheet. But before we bring in that new information, let me illustrate to you that while working with tables, we are also able to do the normal calculations that we are used to. For instance, the person working on this information might want to know the total costs down here, or the total units sold. As I can see, column F is on quantities, the total units sold in this data that we're dealing with. Normally, if you're working with random data, you'd need to come here and put in a sum formula or an average formula depending on what you want to achieve. While working with tables, what you will simply need to do is you'll need to click anywhere inside your table, then go to the table tools that I mentioned. Then while in the table tools, you will find a total row. There is in the midsection here, you will see somewhere written total row, and you need to just check in that box written total row. What that does is it will automatically, at the end of this table, put in some totals. So why don't we try that? So you simply click on total row, and automatically a new row to our table has been inserted. A new row to our table has been inserted. Notice that this is not considered part of the table. It is just considered a summary of the information in our table. And you will notice that it has given me a 0 in the very last column, which is the sales revenue. And that is right, because in column H, we are yet to have any figures. But interestingly, there's a small drop-down button that is just next to that cell. That drop-down button allows you to be able to change the syntax of your formula from, let's say, summation to average to sum if to count if to whatever it is you want, even standard deviation if you wanted. So when you click on this drop down, you are able to see other formula variations that you could actually do to achieve here. Now, what I want us to do is, us having inserted the totals row, notice that it actually works for all the columns we are having, only that it gave us a summary for the last one only. So what you want to do is, I want to come to the unit cost column, which is column G, click on it so that I am able to find the drop-down button. Then for the drop-down button on column G for unit cost, I want to know the average unit cost. The average unit cost for the data we are having currently. And you will see that automatically a figure appears there. Then I'll come to the quantities column, which is column F. And for the quantity sold, I want to know the total number of units sold for the various commodities. So I will pick the total number that will be the sum. I want the sum so that they give me an addition of all these units we have in here. If you are working with normal data, we would have needed to, for this column G, probably do an average function. And for column F, do a sum function, which then again, if you're not very good with functions and formulas, becomes a challenge. But because we are on a table, we are able to just come and click. If I wanted to know how many categories we have, or how many products, how many times we sold, the count, I'll just come to this cell, depending on whichever I want to use, then just click on this drop down and say, I want the count. And Excel will be able to tell me we have 30 entries. Starting from the first one to the last one, these are 30 entries that we have this far. And that is so far so good. The other beautiful thing we have with the other beautiful thing we have with this table is that it is very dynamic. And I want to just go to the additional data sheet, there, copy the information, come back to the data sheet and put it here. We have them side by side. And then I want to pick the headers here and also just paste them here as values so that I illustrate to you something. So I basically have the same structure from my data. And what I want to do is, this second one is not in a table. This first one is in a table. I want to insert filter buttons on this second data, just the filter buttons, not the table. So to insert a normal filter buttons on my data, I just need to come, put my cursor on the very first cell, go to the data tab and click on the filter button that is somewhat at the center of the ribbon. On your version, I believe it's a black filter button. So you'll click on that and we have the filter buttons. Then for this one, I was able to insert the totals by just ticking the totals. But for this case, I'm not able to do that. I'll need to do the formulas manually. But thank God that is not so much a hassle for me. So what I'm going to do is, for unit cost, we did average. So I'm just going to say equals average of all these items here. And then for quantity, we did a sum of all this here. We could have done auto sum for this one. For category, I believe we did account equals count. So this is the result. So I want to write in the word total here so that we make them look similar. So total, and then we have these three figures. Now I want you to notice something here. I'm going to try and filter down this data and also try and filter down the data that is not in a table so that you see some difference. I want you to note the figures that we have down here. Or I think I can just copy this and paste them down, paste them here as values, because it's going to be important for us to be able to see if they're making any change. So I've just copied this and pasted them here as values. I also want to copy this, paste them as values like that. Now, what I want to do is I want to filter these two data sets. One is in a table, one is not in a table. Then we see what happens to the summaries down here. So let me drag this down so that when rows are filtered, we don't lose track of this. Notice that the figures that I've pasted here are from the formulas up here. Same for the figures here as the formulas of what is up here. I want to proceed and go to categories and remove all the accessories, then leave my result at that. Notice something. In the table, our summaries changed. Notice that they're saying we now have only 23 items, the quantity changed, and the unit cost changed. Notice that having filtered this data, and we can even filter it further, and let's say go to the region and say I'm removing 2 regions. When I do that, notice that my summaries in the table actually change to illustrate only the figures that remain in the table. But the summaries as per the data that is not in a table did not change. They remain the same. So that is also another benefit we get while working with Excel tables, in that we are able to maintain or remain with the information that actually changed. What I was trying to illustrate is that by having the totals wrote down here, if we filter or sort our information in the table, the summary changes to illustrate the developments, while for the random data, the summaries actually do not change. It even shows the totals for the information that you sorted out or you filtered. I hope that is clear. Now, what I want us to do next is to try and bring these 2 data sets together, assuming this was data set for another month or another region. So I want to remove the figures that we put in down here. So you can now join me back in continuing with the session. Now, remember we had this data on sheet 2, which is what I want us to have and merge it with whatever we're already having in the table. So what you'll do is you'll go to the additional data sheet, select the entire data. To do that, you can just go and press Control-A, then Control-C. The Control-C, remember, is the shortcut for copying across all platforms on your laptop. Then you'll go to the data sheet. How do you paste the new information? What you want to do is you want to either create a new row here, but instead of creating a new row, if you're working with Excel tables, it's very easy. Put your cursor in the very last cell. See where I've put my cursor? In the very last cell of the very last row, just below the total. Remember I said the totals row is not part of the table, it's just a summary of the information in the table. So put your cursor in the very last cell, just before the total start, then you will press Tab. My data is still filtered, sorry. You cannot press Tab in a filtered data. That is the pop-up that we get in there. Just to make sure we don't have filtered data. Yes, this is now okay. So what I've said we do is you put your cursor in the very last cell of the table you're having, then you press Tab. When you do that, you'll notice that Excel is going to open for you a new row. Then with the data we had copied, we will just come and paste it by pressing Control-V. I'll just go back to make sure I'm still copying. So Control-Copy on this. Come back to data. On the new added row, we'll press Control-V. What is going to happen, interestingly, is that was here is not going to be overwritten. Rather, it will be pushed to below the information. And as we've already indicated, and as you'd expect, of course, the summations and the summaries have also added to accommodate the new information we just brought in. Remember this, the summation for region was 30, it's now at 50. I don't quite remember what we had at quantity, but I know it's changed. And the same happens for the unit cost, that has also changed. So we've not overwritten anything. We've actually just been able to insert the new information that we had in our table. And you can see the new information has also been accommodated in the new table. Okay. But now I want to show a different way in which this could work. A different way in which this could work. So if, for instance, And I think for this one, I want to go back to my data. Then I want to skip one column intentionally. And on the new column, bring in a column called tax. And I'm assuming we're going to have some information down here. When I pressed enter on tax, the table did not expand. And the reason is because we have this blank column here, which does not make this new information to see it is part of my table. So then if I wanted to find a way to expand my table so that this is accommodated as part of the table, what I need to do is I can resize this table. Remember when we were creating this table, there is that pop-up that came where the cell references were indicated. We will need to adjust that. So what you do to achieve that is you click inside the table, then we go to the table tools. Then in the table tools, we will try to find resize the table. I'm using the Mac version of the Excel, so my screen and yours will definitely be different. But on yours, you should be able to easily find resize table. So having picked on that item, then you'll proceed to now be able to adjust so that column J, which is the new part of the information we want to add in, has been incorporated as part of that table. I hope that is okay. The other thing I would also want to show us is by default, when you create your data into a table, it usually picks this color scheme of light blue and white. And I want to tell you that that is not the only possible version. You could actually have Excel pick a different color scheme for your table depending on what you want. For instance, while clicking inside the table, when you go to the table tools, notice that we have what we call styles up here. We have these items called styles, and you can just browse to see the various table styles that we're having. And you can also further expand it to just see the whole list of styles that Excel gives us to be able to work with. And for these styles, you can pick whichever one that you imagine works for you. So currently, this is the one that I think more by default picks. But if let's say I wanted one with some shade of yellow, I could just go and locate it. If this is what I want, I'll click on it. The moment you click on it, you'll see your table style will change to accommodate that new version. So basically, you just changed your table style from the default that is usually there to any other that you want. So you click inside the table, you go to the styles group up in the table tools, and then you pick on whichever style that you imagine works for you. Now, I want us to do some a little bit of calculation while working with tables to be able to just understand how that works. Now, as opposed to working on random or just generic data, while working on tables, you have some advantages to doing your calculations. For instance, if I wanted, for instance, to have my sales revenue, and I have the quantity bought or sold, and the unit cost, which is the cost for one unit of these items, that means the revenue will basically be a multiplication of the two. To get the sales revenue, I'll just need to do the formula the very normal way that you are used to. So what I want to do is you'll come here and say equals. Because we want to multiply those two items, we could just make it easy by coming and clicking on this item. Now, what I want you to notice is, as opposed to Excel writing for us, for instance, F4, which is the cell reference for the item I have selected, Excel has given us a name. Note Excel has brought the name of this column where we are in, okay? So when working with formulas and functions on Excel tables, Excel tends to pull the name elements of your table and use them in your calculation. This is advantageous to you because it helps you to be able to monitor and really make sense of your formulas very quickly. For instance, we've just said we want to multiply this item, then I'll just put a multiplication sign and click on the unit cost. My formula here reads equals quantity times unit cost. which basically, if somebody shared this with me versus, or maybe I'm going to explain that just a little bit more in a second. So what I want us to focus more on now is, having put this formula, I want you to press enter. But I want to tell you that as you press enter, you're going to notice that Excel will auto-populate your answers all the way down. As opposed to if we were doing our formulas manually, we would have said equals, and then now I cannot click inside the table, because the moment I click inside the table, Excel will pick its name. Now notice Excel has picked the name differently. While we were writing the formula inside the table, Excel only told us equals quantity times unit sales, unit cost. But now, because I'm writing this formula outside of the table, Excel is saying you are actually writing a formula that picks a column called quantity from a table called sales data, such that if I had 2 or 3 tables, I'm actually able to know which table Excel is picking information from, right? So, and then times this other item. Now, my formula here is, I am from a table called sales data, I have picked a column called quantity. And from that same table called sales data, I have picked a column called unit cost. And that makes it easy to interpret, as opposed to a formula like equals F4 times G4, which will give me the same answer. But if you compare the syntax, and let me just go to my view so I can enable my formulas to be seen right there. So when you look at this formula here, equals F4 times G4, versus this formula, which brings the same answer, but now really directs me from a table called sales data in a column called quantity, we are multiplying with some data, again in the sales data table, in a column called unit cost. This makes it more human to understand. It's almost like English, right? So it's basically telling us from this table, in this column, we are multiplying it by some other data in this table, in this column, as opposed to F4 and G4, which a little bit almost looks like we are programming something. So the table allows us to have that interactivity. But more essentially, you notice that when we pressed enter, we did not have to come to the fill handle button down here and double click to have this run down. Excel was able to automatically have it do that by itself. I want to quickly illustrate some other items we are able to achieve while working with our table. And first of all, if you find yourself in an Excel table, if you find yourself with an Excel table and you want to take it back to what we had not in a table, so you want to convert it from this to sorry, I was just trying to minimize the Zoom screen. So if you want to convert my data from this, which is a table format, to what we had back here, which is just general data, what you want to do is, while on the table, you'll put your cursor anywhere inside the table. Then all the table tools are found in that temporary ribbon item that we have called table. And then you will come to this item here written convert to range, convert to range. But maybe before I convert to range, one other advantage illustrate earlier is, notice that we have, the column, we have the headings here. If you scroll down on this information to the point where we are no longer able to see the headings, we will still be able to somehow see them. So I want us to just scroll down. You see what happened there? The columns, the headers have been put up here, so that if I picked a random figure down here, I can still be able to know that, oh, this is about unit cost. If I picked a random something down here, I can know, oh, all right, this is actually products. When you scroll down, that is an advantage that you do not get with normal data. You only get that while working with Excel tables, such that as you scroll down big data sets, the headers of your data is somehow populated and you are able to see them, however deep inside your data, you still move down. Now, I'm going to now go back to that element of removing the data from a table, and we said you click inside the table, then you go to the table tools, and then you will click convert to range. Convert to range is to your left. You'll see convert to range. When you click convert to range, that is the operation that converts your table to normal range of data, as the pop-up you can see on your side indicates. Then you'll click yes. Now, many people are convinced that this is still a table. And we can confirm by so many ways of checking. Number one, remember that if we had our cursor inside the table, there was some tool items called table tools or table. You are not going to be able to find out. Can you confirm? However much you click or wherever you click inside this item that looks like a table, you are not going to be able to find the table tools that we've been clicking all this time. The other thing, I just showed you that while working on a table, as you scroll down, the headers follow you and you're able to see them somewhere. That is no longer going to be an advantage you will get because this is no longer a table. Then, as I also illustrated, remember we said that when we filter our data, this totals figure here, they somehow change. That will no longer happen if we decide to filter this data. So if I just come here and insert filter buttons, and filter this out. Let's say we remove these two items. These have actually been able to pick because it's still within the precincts of the table. We needed to have done this outside of the table. We need to have done the filtering away from the area that the table had. So that is why that works. But essentially, we had been able to show that before. So as I was trying to illustrate that, however much this looks like a table, it is not a table anymore. And the best way to show is while you click inside, you're not able to see the table tools. The only thing that happens is when you change your data from a table to a normal range of cells, you retain the formatting that had been put around the information. And many people might find this bothering. They might actually want to still have the table, rather have the data without this formatting. And to achieve that, you have various ways. You can go to your home tab. You can go to your home tab and clear the formatting. You can go to your home tab, and then in the cells group here, we can clear the formatting. Or really, for me, the easiest way to achieve that, I will just come and click a cell out here that is not formatted as a table. I will use the format painter. We had discussed how the format painter works. So I'll click on the format painter and then just come and brush it in the entire sheet. And we'll have my data in the initial plan that it had before we tried changing it into a table. Okay, so what I've done is I've said you can click on any cell that doesn't have the formatting we're looking for, and then be able to choose the format painter and brush it over everything. Alternatively, we could have come to the styles here, and on your version, you should be able to see clear cells or clear formatting, or be able to pick any formatting style that you imagine fits whatever it is you're looking for as a formatting convention. Okay, as a formatting convention. So that is the other thing. Now, if we have this information and we want it back into the table, remember the illustrated, you click inside this data, you go to file, you go to insert and click table. But I did tell you that there's a shortcut. While you are on this information that is now not in a table and you want to convert it back to a table, you can click the shortcut Control T for table, and it shall bring us the same pop-up that we dealt with the other time, which you shall just click OK on, and we back on our table as we started. So those are some of the basics of working with Excel tables. And while on the styles, though, you can actually decide to create your own style. If you do not like all the preset styles that are here, you can come to new table style and be able to create one that works for you. You can come and rename it, DataClave. Then be able to choose what exactly you want. How do you want the whole table to be? What are the stripes? What are the colors? And everything that you really want to happen for your table. Then when you click OK, that will be saved. I am just sharing the slides so that we can check the items covered, just in case we have something you wanted us to look at again. So there are a few disadvantages of working with tables, though, that we also cannot miss speaking about. Number one is because the table uses structured references. Structured references is, when we wrote that formula and instead of giving us equals, then the cell reference, it gives us an element in the table name that is usually, it's not absolutely locked. Now, when we're speaking about cell referencing, we discussed 3 different types of referencing. That is a session we'll have in the near future. But it's not absolutely locked, which means when you drag your answers, especially when you're working with a table, never drag your formulas to the right. When you drag them down, it works beautifully. But when you drag your formulas to the right, don't do that on Excel tables. There's a workaround for that. Tables will not automatically expand when you're working on protected sheets. When we talk about data integrity, we have something called data protection. When you work on protected sheets, the table will not automatically expand. Then you also cannot group or move multiple sheets if any of them has any table. So the table basically just limits how you are able to interact with the data with other sheets or pieces of information that you have on your file. But those are easy. You can always find a way dealing with them. We talked about preparing your data before you move them into the table. And I think most of this we already illustrated. Creating the Excel table, we said you go to the ribbon and click table, or you press the shortcut Control-T, which I've just illustrated as we were finishing this bit. Whenever you put your data inside a table, you automatically get the options to sort and filter that we were able to illustrate beautifully. So the sort and filter option automatically comes in your data. Renaming, we talked about that. The naming principles we discussed. You cannot use cell references. The number of characters is limited. I think we already discussed all of that. Allow me to just illustrate one last thing then as we move away from this. So what you can always do while your data is beautifully sitting in tables like this is you can always bring in some advanced filters to assist you work around this. While your cursor is inside the table, go to the table tools option. Then I want you to click on insert slicer. I think we've discussed the slicers in a previous session that we did here, but just for having you remember, click on insert slicer. This is an advanced filtering tool that you can always use with your tables to make your work a little easier and really beautiful if you want to say. So click on insert slicer. And while on insert slicer, I want you to click on region and category. Click on those two only, region and category, and say OK. This will bring you these 2 items, which are what we call the slicers. And what I want you to do with the slicers is just drag them and just align them close to your information like that. Remember, we drag the slicers by putting our cursor in the white space near the name of the slicer, not on the blue items. The blue items are responsive to touch. So you put on the white space just above the slicer name. Then you can resize the slicers. You can resize the slicers like that. Then also pick the second slicer and also decide to arrange it somewhere. Then resize it, of course, to something that works for you. Let's say something like that. Now, what these slicers are going to assist us to do is, if, for instance, I wanted to filter the category column and only choose clothing, instead of coming here and having to check and uncheck the boxes to achieve that, I'll simply be able to come and click on clothing. And you see my data has automatically been filtered to give me the information for clothing. And if I wanted footwear and accessories, the same way like that. If I want all my data back, I can just come to this filter button at the top of that slicer and click on the filter button to clear all the filters that we've created. Now, if I come and click on, let's say, region East, then I will have only the items that appeared for that region. If I choose another region, likewise, the same would happen. And if I can even do cross filter in that, I might want to see clothing items that come from the East. So if I just do a quick random check here, because this has already been filtered for clothing, I see that I only have two East components, this one and this one. So when I come and click on East, I only expect to remain with those two. And you see that actually happened. So the slicers allow you to even do cross filters depending on what you want to do. And in the session we will do on dashboard reporting, we'll be able to show how you can even use the slicers to further be able to do your reports in a way that really gets a lot of interactivity and allows you to be able to show multiple information and multiple reports at the same time and all in one screen. The session for today was to just make you more comfortable to want to use Excel tables, and especially if your end game is to do interactive reporting or do development of databases. This is the kind of information that you could be having different pieces of information that are stored on different sites or on different Excel files, and all of them relate towards communicating the same thing. So you want to create a database, you want to do reporting, you want to do dashboards, you have to be very comfortable working with tools, be able to make your work easier to achieve. And I think lastly is just to thank you so very much for being here with us today, and hope to see you next time.